I'm even recording, Steve. So now we're recording.
Oh, you didn't record that bit where I was doing this?
Well, that's great, isn't it? At least they won't see that. So good morning for the people who I've just started recording. We've been online for about 7 or 8 minutes. You've missed a wonderful conversation about me moving into the attic and whatnot, but let's continue. So we're on our starter. And let's just tell the people that I'm recording for, so people who might be watching on catch up on YouTube. So we're just going through a very simple motion of moving our hands in a certain direction. So up and down and right and left. And it's a bit like miming. So again, for those people that I've just started the recording for, let's just give them a bit of a practice, Steve. So together, so up and down and right and left and left and left and down and right and up and left and right and down and up. Fab. Okay, so Steve, you have got this. Effortless and ease for you is what I see. I'm going to shake it up a little bit. So up is now down. So when I say the word up, you need to bring your hands down. And when I say the word down, you need to take your hands up. And when I say the word right, you need to put up your left hand. And when I say left, you need to put up your right hand. Got it?
Yes.
Look at that enthusiasm. I can see the enthusiasm oozing out of you. You seem to just absolutely enjoy this activity.
Can't believe I'm doing this in front of a camera. Carry on.
And I think just to explain the folks at home, what's happening here is that your right and left side, because you're having to do cross body movements, your right and your left side of the brain are starting to talk to each other, or starting to develop that communication. And it's at that point when the two parts of the brain start communicating with each other, does absolute magic happen in our lives, because you're starting to have those two parts of the brain that actually should be communicating with each other a lot more of the time, doing that a bit more frequently. So it's the opposite. So if I say up, you go down. If I say down, you go up. If I say right, you go left. And if I say left, you go right.
Be gentle with us.
We will. Let's start nice and slow. So down, up, down, up, right, right, left, left, down, down. Steve, up. Okay, I'm gonna speed it up a little bit, and I'm gonna try to keep myself engaged as well, which is gonna be incredibly interesting, Steve. And if you're watching at home, please don't copy what me and Steve are doing, because chances are we might not be getting it absolutely right.
Turn the screen off is my advice.
Okay, and 3, 2, 1.
Yes.
Down, down, right, left, right, left, right, down, down, up, right, left, down, up, down, up, left. Ooh, I put my left hand up there, Steve. That wasn't right there, was it? Right.
High five.
Well, there you are. Oh, wow, that actually looks quite great. Do that again, Steve. Look how awesome this looks. Oh, guys, you need to try doing that on a Zoom call next time. And I think I'm going to stop it there, just because I think hopefully people get the point of that. But yeah, as I said, it's to enable that communication between the right side of the brain and the left side of the brain. And in doing so, you just find that your day seems to be a bit more creative, a bit more effortless, and it just provides you with a bit more control of what's happening.
Do you know what? It fits in so well. I was having a shower this morning and listening to an old radio show on the radio, and one of the contestants told us about a new word, and the word is testiculate.
Okay.
Testiculate. Yep. And it applies to certain politicians. It's when they wave their arms around and talk bollocks.
I like that.
That's what it looked like.
It did. And you see, people have always said that I would be a really good politician. So I don't know whether there's a connection there or not.
I'm saying nothing.
Anyway, let's move on
to story.
We would love a story. We would love a story.
Okay. So this is a classical story that has been adapted specifically for the stuff that we want to talk about today.
Fab.
Okay, so once upon a time, over in Greece, there was a lad called Jason. He was nothing special. He was not too rich or too poor, too young or too old. He wasn't ugly, but not even his mum would call him beautiful. He was Mr. Average. Anyway, one day he heard of a strange legend about the fleece of a golden ram. And it seemed that if you found it and wrapped it around your loins, not only would it keep your loins warm, but it would give you everything that you ever wanted. Now, Jason wanted things, so he was interested. But he realized that this was not a quest to be undertaken lightly. He needed help and he needed advice. And as Google hadn't yet been invented, he decided to visit the source of all knowledge, the Oracle. Now, the Oracle lived in caves under a hill. And the way it works is that Jason had to get a bank loan and transfer a couple of €1,000 into the account of the Oracle. Then he could enter the caves and get the advice that he needed. So he did all that and he turned up at the caves, and there were 6 of them, each one focusing on a specific aspect of the quest. The first cave dealt with physical, environmental factors that he would need to consider for the search. So, for example, the fleece was overseas, so he was going to need a boat, and he was going to need supplies, and he was going to need a crew of people called Argonauts to help him find the fleece. The second cave was all about the behaviours that he would need to show, and that would be needed to find the fleece. So, for example, Jason didn't know his new crew. So one of the behaviours that he decided he would settle on was he'd tell them a little bit about the quest, but not everything, because then their behaviour might change and take over the quest anyway. The focus of the third cave was about the skills and capabilities that he needed. So as well as proficient sailors, he needed a navigator or someone who could use a GPS. And also, because of the perils and dangers on the way, he might need to include in his crew a bunch of warriors that would help fight off any monsters or demons or pirates or whatever. Cave 4 was all about how finding the fleece would fit in with Jason's beliefs and values. How could he use the fleece so that it was in sync with what was most important to him and what drove his behavior in the first place? In the 5th cave, the answers there were all relating the quest to Jason's own identity. How would this Mr. Average cope with his success when he found it? How would he feel about himself and the changes that would inevitably come with the extra cash and attention and fame? The 6th and final cave was looking at their sense of connectedness. So if Jason had this golden fleece, how would it affect other people, his family, his friends, the other Argonauts, his country, and the wider world in all its flatness? Jason, following the Oracle's advice, went away to ponder these questions, and only when he had found some answers did he feel ready to start his quest. Of course, what you've realised, and Jason hadn't, was that the Oracle gave him no advice at all. All the answers that he found in the caves came from Jason himself. And when he took time to think about why he was actually doing the quest, what exactly he was going to do to ensure its success, how he was going to do it, and how it fitted in with the rest of the stuff going on in his life. Still, he didn't feel too ripped off. And do you know what? Even in those days, a couple of €1,000 worth of debt was nothing when you lived in Greece.
And I don't know whether what part of the story to kind of comment on first, without necessarily leaving that last sentence completely alone, because I think what a humorous way to end the story. But what an incredible, insightful story as well. And I think one part that really got to me, and again, I've got these cards around me with all the presuppositions, the NLP statements of intent,
yes,
written on them. And one of them says, we already have all the resources we need, or we can create them. And clearly, from my reading of that story or interpretation of that story, Jason had the resources that he needed.
But there's something in there as well for me about relating that idea that we have resources, but often we don't need them, to two things. First of all, that sometimes we just need a little bit of a help to get where we want to be. And the other thing was the idea of those 6 caves, because they relate to that technique that I'm sure lots of people are familiar with, that the idea of logical levels.
Yes, yeah.
Just for me, it just give me a systematic way of thinking about issues, changes that I might want to make, stuff that's happening to me in my life. So they happen at the idea is that it happens at 6 different levels. So there's the environmental stuff, the physical stuff, where am I, who's around me, that sort of thing. What sort of behaviours do I use? How do I use my behaviours skillfully so that I'm getting what I want? How does that chime in with my beliefs and values? That idea of identity, what the effect it has on my identity, and then that wider connectedness. So yeah, so I like that story for that. Yeah.
And you're absolutely right that the 6 caves for me, now that you've mentioned it, absolutely that reference to logical levels, I can see it now. And when I learned about logical levels, at first I was a little bit like, really? And again, unfortunately, and I say this with quite some with knowing that back then I was pretty naive about a lot of this stuff. Unfortunately, I didn't understand the power of it. I didn't understand the true power. And so when our trainer, because we trained with the same person, talked about it being the Swiss Army penknife of NLP.
Yes, he did, didn't he?
And he talks about it being the Swiss Army penknife. And I thought, it must be really, really good then if it's the Swiss Army penknife. And again, words like Swiss Army penknife can conjure all sorts of images, perhaps in one's head. So in my head, it conjured up quite a powerful image. And I came across logical levels. And unfortunately, like I said, for me back then, I just thought, it doesn't seem like a Swiss Army penknife at all. It just seems like some levels that you're exploring. And it was only later in my NLP journey that I found them really, really insightful. And in actual fact, yesterday we were talking about some feedback that I've had recently, based on an interview that I went to. And one of the pieces of feedback was, you need to be much more explicit. So you need to tell us exactly who you are and what you bring to this organization. And on reflection and having a conversation with you, and this is where kind of this whole concept of us talking about logical levels, because we love to talk about applied NLP, came from. I told you that actually I talked about the environment. Well, actually, I'd shared a presentation with you, hadn't I, Steve?
You did.
For the job.
Yeah, it was really good.
And I talked about the environment, and I talked about my behaviors. So I talked about my skill set and whatnot. And I believe I talked about my capabilities and skills as well. And I talked, I believe, about my values and beliefs in that presentation, why I believe this organization is fabulous, that the power of youth work generally, and my belief in supporting young people. And I talked also about connection. And I talked about actually how I know that through my role, I could connect to other people. And I remember people often saying, and our trainer often saying, if they're not in alignment with each other, then often it's probably not right for you. So if one of these aren't aligned with each other, and it was the identity, Steve.
Yeah.
So what I couldn't do was was to get into that identity. I couldn't be explicit about what I would bring. And it's all
part of the feedback,
it's all of absolutely, it's all of that stuff. It's all of my skills and behaviors, capabilities. But it was about having that real sense of identity of, yep, this is me, rather than just talking about it from a very second or even third person perspective.
Yeah.
And it was only when we spoke yesterday and you and I told you the feedback that I'd got, and it was actually yourself, if you remember, Steve, who said, well, actually that links back to logical levels, and it's the identity. You haven't perhaps nailed the identity part of it, Jaff. And that is so true.
Yeah. And it was such a lovely example that it kind of inspired us, if that's the right word, for our conversation today. That idea that it's almost trying to second guess what people are after. So in an interview, what do the interviewers really want from you? And so my guess would be that I'm sure that the interviewers are interested in things like your beliefs and values. I'm sure that they're interested in what skills you have and the behaviours that you use. I'm sure they're interested in kind of how you might affect the environment that you're working in. And they can get all that from other pieces of information in a way. So they'll have an idea of what kind of skills and competencies you have, because you've gone to the trouble of filling in an application form or a CV, and it's there in front of them. Whether it's true or not is something else, but that's always the lottery kind of thing in interviews. But it's almost like if you leave out what I do, that identity stuff. This is my identity. This is what I'll bring, and this is the change I make. That is the really unique stuff, because lots of people have beliefs and values about I don't know, integrity, say, and honesty. So that's going to be important to any job. If you're applying for a specific job, then, like I say, you'll have got the qualifications that are necessary. But that idea of what does Jaff bring to this post is the unique bit. It's the bit of magic, isn't it? It's the lovely bit.
And that, I think, is where, for me, logical level gives you such an insight into you as a person as a whole. So there is that wider insight, so you can look at, and I think we both do it, and apologies for speaking on your behalf, Steve, but I'm pretty sure we both do it before any training session, really. What I like to do is walk through logical levels. And so to go, right, let me just take myself for a minute, and what's my environment going to be like? What's my behavior going to be like? What are my skills and capabilities? What are my beliefs and values about this training session that I'm running? What's my identity as a trainer? What's my connection? When I deliver this training in a superb, fantastically brilliant way, where people go, wow, my gosh, that is light bulb moments all over. And they really walk away with knowing much more about themselves, because for me, that's what training is really about. It's not about imparting knowledge or wisdom. It's about people walking away with a greater sense of themselves. What would that look like in terms of the deeper world? And when you start to do that, it becomes much more ingrained. It becomes much more central to you as a person, and you can start to really start to get a really good understanding of who you are and where you come from, and what it is that you have to offer.
I was a bit like you, when I learned, because I've got a particularly strong kinesthetic going on, especially when I'm learning. And I think I'm right in saying that it was Robert Dilts that kind of divide logical levels, and he kinesthetic, he likes to have people wandering around, and it didn't do it for me. It's like, oh God, do I have to move around? And again, I can't remember Chris, our trainer, saying, because I was saying, I don't really get this at all, and like you, I was kind of frustrated with myself, because it's been described as the army knife, which is a brilliant metaphor, isn't it? It's great. And I just wasn't getting it. And Chris said, well, look, he said, you drink tea? I said, yeah. He said, well, do you come down in the morning and make yourself a brew? I said, yeah, I do. He said, and you stood stock still. And I went, nah, I'll wander around the kitchen, I'll put dishes away, or do a bit of washing up, or I'll be doing stuff while I'm waiting for the kettle to boil. He said, yeah, me too. He said, so one way of getting into it, and I found this so helpful, was, he said, instead of doing washing up, he said, do logical levels.
Yeah.
And I went, yeah, what?
Yeah.
He said, well, if you've got space, just walk, take 6 steps along your along the worktop where your kettle's boiling. They don't have to be huge steps. Just make a movement forward as you move into each logical level. And that made it for me. Because all of a sudden it was like, yeah, you know how sometimes you go into sort of a little trancey state when you're kind of waiting for something to happen and you can't do anything until the kettle's boiled, otherwise the tea will be horrible. So you do other things, but you're kind of on autopilot. So the idea of, if I'm doing some training that day, or for me, specifically, I had a couple of roles at the time. I was a youth worker and I was also doing some training, which sounds similar. There are subtle differences in all of those 6 all of those 6 logical levels. And so if I spent the previous 3 days working as a youth worker in a school, and now I was delivering some training, it was just so useful to kind of make that switch from Steve as the best trainer he can be, Steve as the best youth worker he can be, switching it to Steve as the best trainer that he can be today. Dead useful.
Yeah.
Because like I say, there were little changes that I needed to make at each of those 6 levels. So the idea of actually stepping into a different level anchored it and also moved you forward. So there was less kind of, what I found was there was less, if I said contamination, I don't mean it in a bad way, but if you moved from behavior into skills, well, there was less overlap between the two.
Yeah.
So that idea of making a physical movement was really useful.
And of course, you can do this, as you said, at any point. So you can do it waiting for a brew. You can, ideally, the best way to do it is the way we've been taught to do it, and the way we support people who are going through change to do it, is to walk through. Because again, we've talked about spatially anchoring stuff on previous episodes. So if you haven't caught up on that kind of notion, then please do. But in brief, by spatially anchoring a particular spot to your behavior, then ultimately, depending on what positive behaviors that you have, by stepping back into that space, you can associate back into those behaviors as well. So that there's double, triple, quadruple benefits to kind of spatially anchoring a space. And I think that whole idea of, if you're not comfortable doing it walking, and some people absolutely aren't, some people go, well, just try being sat down. And again, I've heard stories of people doing this whilst they're rolling up a cigarette, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
So people are doing this, right? What's this and what's that? And it continues and it continues and it continues. And that whole kind of idea of, so doing it in a space that's comfortable and right for you. And like we keep saying, these give you, by going through these logical levels, give you an insight in terms of any particular situation that you might want to explore. So a couple of really fabulous stories that we've been told is, and the one that sticks in my head in particular, and again, probably because it was relevant to me at the time, was a woman who had gone to apply to be a chief executive for a local charity. So she was senior manager, gone to apply to be a local chief executive for a local charity, and kind of was umming and ahhing. So I got to the interview stage and was umming and ahhing. And kind of Chris, our trainer, went, so what is it that you're umming and ahhing about? And she said, I just don't know. There's something that's just niggling away at me. And we often talk about it. I've got that gut feeling. I've got butterflies in my stomach. There's just something that is not quite right here. So Chris said, well, let's go through logical levels. So she went through it. Environment, she could picture herself behind a desk and supporting staff and doing all that kind of stuff in the building that she was in. Behaviors, so again, supporting staff, being able to fundraise, being able to manage programs, being able to manage a charity, etc. Skills and capabilities, so absolutely she had that. Beliefs and values, she absolutely believed in the charity. She believed in the purpose of the charity. She believed that she had the skills and capabilities, as previously said, to do the job really, really well. She valued the work that she did. She valued supporting people. Identity. Yeah, I don't see myself as a chief executive.
Right.
I don't see myself as a chief executive.
And if she was going into meetings or speaking on the phone or whatever, she would have to introduce herself as, my name is whatever, I am the chief executive. So that's a really strong identity statement, isn't it? Because if you think about the implications of those two words, chief executive, it implies to me responsibility, reliability, ability to cope in crises. There's a whole bunch of stuff that just gets attached to those two simple words. And when people say, I am the chief executive of whatever, then there's a whole lot of baggage that goes with it.
And I think for me, it relates really, really well currently. So I know we've had conversations previously as well about this whole identity notion. But if I finish that story first, so kind of identity, I'm not a chief executive. No, absolutely. I think that's really, really important. Connection. Yeah, I can see how being a chief executive could have massive connections to the world, but I can't see myself as a chief executive.
Yes.
And that for me was so incredibly powerful. So just by doing logical levels, and you know that before this, she had no idea what it was. So all she knew is that she had something in the pit of her stomach that made her feel like this isn't quite right. And you could do that about absolutely anything. So of course that's quite a high profile job. We've talked about doing it before we start a training session. And I think that I would encourage teachers, if there's any teachers listening in, to think about before they start teaching on a particular day, to perhaps do this in their own classroom. You could do it on a range of you can do it on a range of situations. And the beauty of logical levels is that once you realize which one of those, because ultimately you know that something is right for you in Jaff's world anyway, you know that something's right for you in Jaff's world when the logical levels are aligned.
Yes.
So if for that lady that identity was aligned, perfect. Because her identity was out of kilt from that alignment, well, then the beauty of NLP, and this is, I think, why I really love it so much, is then I've got a load of strategies that can help me work on that if I want to. And for that lady, she didn't want to. Fabulous. She just said, nope, that's not for me. And actually, I need to remember who I am and what I enjoy doing, etc. But if you do want to, so if you go through logical levels and you go, oof, my skills and capabilities aren't quite there, or I feel they aren't quite there for the situation that I need to handle more resourcefully, well, then there's a set of tools and strategies that can support you to be able to do that. And I know we've had a number of conversations, Steve, about my identity. So for people who are perhaps listening in for the first time or don't know much about me, grew up in the youth work world, was a young person, became a member of staff, kind of went through various different roles and responsibilities. And I've got this identity blessed that for some reason I can't seem to shake as well as I'd hoped I could have, which is I'm a youth worker. And kind of I speak to colleagues and colleagues go, we think you're a little bit more than that, or probably a lot more than that, Jaff. But identities, and we will hopefully at some point in a subsequent session talk about some of these kind of concepts, because identities are really, really strong, aren't they? And when you have an identity that I am a youth worker, well, then any other kind of identity that you wish to have or that you hope to have can become secondary to that, depending on how strong it is. And I know in my case, it is blooming strong, Steve. And I know we've had multiple conversations about this. And so what I can do is do my logical levels. And because I'm aware that that's quite a strong element of me, it's around how do I then draw on those resources of being a youth worker from an environment, behavior, skills and capabilities, beliefs and values, and connection in any other aspect, because that identity is quite strong. And part of me loves it. Part of me is like, that's great. And part of me from time to time goes, perhaps it's holding you back. And so it's about then going, okay, well, what is it that I can take from that?
It's interesting that, that, because I think other people kind of hang things on that, especially around identity, perhaps. So you were talking about your identity as a youth worker, and I was sitting there smiling to myself, remembering a situation in a school that I used to work in, and it was coming up to the end of the Christmas term, so it'll be the end of this term, and we'd ask the kids. There was only a tiny unit it was for naughty kids, but we'd ask the young people, what would you like to do? And what they wanted to do was to leave our building, go out the front door, walk 200 yards down the road to Pizza Hut. That's what they wanted to do. And they spent some time kind of saving a bit of money each week, and we put some money towards it, and it was all planned and ready to go. And I got a phone call half an hour before we were supposed to leave from my line manager, who didn't work in the building. She had an office 3 miles away, saying, I hear you're going to Pizza Hut. And I said, yes. And she said, well, which teacher is going with you? And I said, well, we haven't got a teacher going with the group, but don't worry, because I'm here. And as a youth worker, I collected all kinds of outdoor education qualifications over the years. And she said, no, you're not going without a qualified teacher. And I said, well, why not? And she said, well, you're a youth worker. And it states clearly in the council's health and safety procedure that for a group to leave school, they have to have a qualified teacher with them. It was baffling. It was baffling to me. So my identity as a youth worker wasn't sufficient to help kids cross a road. Was my interpretation of it, which was hugely frustrating. But it's that thing about, well, if you have an identity as a teacher, it gets bound up in a certain certificate rather than the certificate that you get as a youth worker, and that kind of affects things like your skills and competencies, your behaviours, and the environment that you're comfortable working in. What a lot of testiculation. We ended up getting takeaway. The kids were happy, so that was the main thing. But I was it's funny how that works. You were mentioning how you used it, and one of the nicest ways that I've found of using the logical levels is I do some work, as you've done as well, with Erasmus Plus in Europe, and so you can find yourself in some amazing places with amazing groups of people. And the last time I used this, I think I was in the middle of the Czech Republic in a beautiful building with a group of these youth worker characters from all over Europe and the Middle East. So we had something like, I think there was 12 different nationalities, and different cultures, different religions, different sort of mother tongues. So most people were speaking in a secondary tongue. And I used the logical levels, and I used the story actually that I told earlier as a way to split the group up and just to get them to think about what their expectations of the course was. Now, we had the luxury, it was an 8-day residential course, it was really intense. So we had a couple of hours to do this. And so in small groups, they went and visited the 6 caves that Jason went round, just kind of running that idea, well, what kind of behaviour are we going to have? And out of that cave, there came a sort of contract for the week. When it came to things like identity, then people were saying, well, this is the bits of me that I want to share, but there are other bits that I'm going to hold back a little bit until I feel more comfortable, which makes perfect sense in any group situation. And then, you know, the idea of connection, that almost spiritual group, but spiritual idea that at the 6th logical level, then that thing about, well, how are we going to form a group that is cohesive and works together and has that kind of that culture that develops as people get to know each other. And it was just a beautiful way of doing it, and as an icebreaker, as well as a kind of, this is what we're going to do. This is and how we're going to do it. it was just a lovely exercise to do. So yes, I've stored that away in my kind of mental filing cabinet. So whenever I'm working with a group, it's a nice way to start.
Well, I was just going to say that any kind of groups or again, people listening in might be facilitators of various different workshops. So we also know that people have done this, for example, in places like the NHS.
Yes.
So they're coming up with a brand new strategy.
Yeah.
They've finalized it. Fabulous. We've got a brand new 3-year strategy. Well, actually, what then do we need our environment to look like?
Yeah.
What sets of behaviors do we need? Or before they start developing that strategy, what is it that we need? What's the environment? What's the behavior? What's our skills and capabilities? What's our values and beliefs? What's our identity? What's our connection? So it could be used in a plethora of different ways is kind of, I think, what we're trying to say. And that's why then, coming back to the Swiss Army penknife, did it make sense? So only a few years after I'd heard that and started becoming more and more and more immersed in this kind of stuff, did I go, what a beautiful metaphor, what a wonderful metaphor.
Yeah.
And silly me back then not even understanding what that metaphor meant. And you have to go through that journey. You have to go through that journey of self-exploration, as I think we both did, to really understand the power of some of this stuff, and to know that actually any setting it can be used in to get the results that or to get the insight that you might want. And knowing that one of them might be out of kilter is really important. And I think one of the really wonderful ways that I've heard it being used or talked about is when it comes to relationships. And relationships, not only intimate relationships, but friendships, relationships with families, any sort of relationship that you might have with other people. And knowing and looking at that relationship through the lens of logical levels. And I don't know about you, Steve, but I'd always, and I'm still single at the minute and still looking for someone, but typically before I did logical levels, what I thought was I have to find someone who, at an environment level, likes similar environments to me, likes to go to similar places that I like to go to, similar restaurants, like to watch similar movies and be in similar environments. Likes to, I'm a very hot I love the hot weather, so needs to have. Oh, if someone likes a cold, that's not my kind of person. We can't be doing that. That's complete opposites. Or I need someone who's got very similar behaviors to me. So someone who will behave in a way that is whatever. Or someone who's got some of my capabilities and skills. So being able to network, being able to have chats like this online. And so what I need to do is find someone that I could do a podcast with, replace Steve eventually. No, I'm only joking, Steve. I'll never replace you. I'll never replace you. And then we'd get to values and beliefs or stuff like that. And I'd go, yeah, it's great that they've got similar values to me. That's not really important though, is it? It's fab, but it's kind of what I'd want, or got a similar identity to me. Oh, and it'd be kind of very much brushing that bit off. And again, it was our trainer who kind of said, typically, and again, this is not for every single relationship across the whole world, but typically those people who are aligned at the top 3 logical levels, so beliefs and values, identity and connection, are more likely to keep that relationship intact than those who are aligned at the bottom 3 logical levels.
Yeah.
So environment, behavior, and skills and capabilities.
Yeah. Well, the idea is that as you go through them from behavior through to that connection spirituality thing, the idea is that they become more psychologically significant anyway.
Deeper, yeah.
I'm guessing. It makes me think of my guilty pleasure at the moment. I've moved on from wheeler dealers to first dates, which I just think is an amazing show. And for people, anyone who's done NLP, then kind of watching 2 strangers trying to relate, not only in a slightly artificial way of an arranged date, a blind date, but also with cameras and that crew of waiters and waitresses that are waiting on them. But it's interesting because I was thinking about it in terms of how we build rapport. So first of all, so they don't get to choose the environment in a way. So people come in and they've already been paired up by whatever algorithm they use on the program, that these two might have a go, so the environment is sorted. But then you think about behavior, and so you'll see people, the first thing that they'll see is the physical person before they say a word as they walk across the restaurant towards them. Have you seen this show?
I haven't. I need to watch it. I need to watch it.
Have a look. It's ace. It really is. So they walk, and some of the behavior that they've done beforehand is to select and choose what to wear.
Okay.
And so that plays part of that thing about making that connection. And then they start talking about things that they do in their lives, their skills and their capabilities. I didn't know there were still lion tamers. I didn't know you could still be a chimney sweep. That sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? So that they kind of build rapport at those different levels. And then they kind of get into that stuff about values and identity, and at the end of it, maybe there's a connection, but they have to build up to that. Even if it's just a physical connection, there still needs to be stuff between behavior and skills, and that just a purely physical connection, I think, if it's going to work, like you said, if it's going to last.
And that makes me then think, so being of the background that I am, which again, arranged marriages are quite common, and arranged mutual marriages, so I need to make this really distinct distinction between two sets of marriages, because I don't know who might be watching at what point, so I think it's really important that I make that distinction. But for people who consensually agree to an arranged marriage, so I'll take my brother, for example, who absolutely agreed to it, has now been married for 10 years, has got 4 beautiful children, and really, really happy. And yet, Steve, none of what you described there happened.
That's interesting, isn't it?
None of that happened. So what did happen was, and this is, and I remember because I was there in Pakistan at the time, what did happen was he was shown a picture, she was shown a picture. They had very, very little opportunity to speak, and probably because they didn't want to speak. And they kind of went, yeah, we'll get married.
So, okay, let's think about just unpicking that. And I need to do this really carefully because we're talking about your culture, not mine.
Yeah.
Okay. But I mean, from an outsider's point of view, my first thought is, well, actually what's happened is they've gone, your brother and his future wife went straight to connection, spirituality. So I'm guessing that marriage was based on a cultural sharing, maybe a religious sharing, and a connection at that level that enabled them then to kind of
work
almost
backwards.
build it backwards.
Work backwards.
So we start from this position of, we don't know any of the other stuff, but our position of strength is that we've got this shared culture, shared religious beliefs, shared respect for our parents, and our families.
And in actual fact, Steve,
based on that,
sorry, go on.
I was going to say, based on that, then that gives us the foundation to kind of go the other way, which actually seems, if you accept the idea that the 6 logical levels increase in significance, then it's much. I'm thinking aloud here. I haven't really. It's much more stable than if you start from things like behaviours and skills.
And perhaps because I look at the 2 of them, so I absolutely agree with that. I look at the 2 of them, and I think, just based on what you said, so again, I'm thinking aloud here, and it may not come out the way that I want it to.
Well, they're there now. Come on, let's talk to him.
But I think what happened is that you're absolutely right. They went to connection first and foremost. and they kind of left the three. So again, it kind of gives evidence. It kind of proves that the top three logical levels are much more kind of, I wouldn't say important, but important is probably the kind of the best word that I can find right now. So I think what they've done is gone, not only have we got a shared connection culturally and religiously, but we've got a shared set of values and beliefs. So we've got a shared set of values and beliefs about what marriage is and what marriage within our culture is.
And that's demonstrated through their commitment.
How marriages are formed. And it's also demonstrated through previous marriages. So actually, my brother is the fifth in six of six of us. And previous marriages, more often than not, in the wider family, were arranged in a very similar way. Perhaps not almost instantaneously, but were arranged. And kind of, so our values and beliefs are that arranged marriages can and do work. And that you don't necessarily need to spend this amount of time getting to know someone, because history demonstrates that happens. Our identity is that we are two Muslims, I'm guessing at that point, who know that within our religion, marriage is incredibly important, and therefore, and interestingly, within our religion, it also says that marriage is half of your religion. So by being married, you've completed half of your religion. So
really?
when you come to an identity perspective, half of your religion is complete just by being married.
So if you're not married, does that mean that you are not a full Muslim?
No, it means that you're and again, I'm talking aloud here, and I am probably not the most knowledgeable person in any of this, but from my understanding, it's that by being married, you've made that commitment to kind of securing sourcing half of your religion, if that makes sense. If you're not married, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not, but it just means you've strengthened that. Is probably the best way to look at it.
No, I get that.
Now, interestingly, I think that, well, my brother's from England, born and raised in the UK. His wife is from Pakistan. So if you look at it from an environment perspective, well, two very different environments.
Yeah.
If you look at it from a behavior perspective, well, he's incredibly educated, bless her, just because of the very cultural norms within that country, not so much. So very different behaviors. And also very different skill sets. But I think what did happen, and it was just based on what you said, is that they went straight to connection first and foremost, and then worked back to those last two logical levels and went, yeah, these two are absolutely in alignment with each other. And so it doesn't matter about the rest. It doesn't matter about kind of all the rest of it. Or kind of, it does matter, but we can work on that. We can work on the environment. And bless her, she has fit in really well into UK life, and that is incredibly difficult to fit into UK life. She's managed to pick up a number of behaviours that actually you would expect from someone who was born and raised in the UK. She's managed to develop a set of skills and competencies. Her English is quite proficient now, So, but I think we'll work on those three. We can absolutely work on those three. It's these three that we need to be fixed on. And part of that, I don't think, was within their conscious or even unconscious awareness. Part of that, I think, was external factors that determined that would work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah. So I guess the what I'm filtering now is that maybe not what I'm filtering, but maybe what they've filtered is through the question of, well, what's most important here? It's not where we live, not the country we live in. It's this at the other end of the spectrum. It's this connection that we have, this shared connection, shared beliefs and values, shared identities. That is interesting. How on earth did we end up there?
Fascinating, just fascinating. It's and this is the wonderful stuff. So again, without necessarily having a conversation with him, because and I think at some point I will do. I will never know. But what I do know is, like I said, it was instantaneous. And so and we got onto this talking about relationships. So part of me wonders, Steve. So we've got all the apps out there. So Muslim myself, there's the equivalent of Tinder, which is Minder. I don't know, clearly very original, whoever developed that app. And there's various others. And part of me wondered whether actually, because again, if you look at apps, they're very, very superficial. So what you're not really getting from an app is someone's beliefs and values, someone's identity, or someone's connection. Now you could perhaps get that from an app, and I'm talking more around dating apps here, depending on how much stuff you put on there. So my app, just by the very nature of who I am, my bio is this long. Well, the feedback I've got is that's really off-putting.
Okay.
But what I put in my app, what I put in my bio, knowing this stuff, all my beliefs and values, is my identity and is my connection. And so by their very nature, what apps like that tend to do, and it got me thinking about perhaps developing an NLP dating app based on logical levels.
I was just having the same idea.
Let's do it, Steve. Let's
Okay.
it could
Just
fund
everybody
our
else, that's our idea.
that's
You
our
put it out,
idea,
you've got-
guys. I
Yeah.
just realized we're live, aren't we, Steve?
Oh, we just shared it with the world.
As if that's gonna work. Psh, don't be so silly. That won't work, guys. Just ignore what me and Steve said in the last 2 or 3 minutes.
Well, there's another show at the moment as well that gets people to marry without ever having met each other.
Wow.
And all they do, so they've had absolutely no contact until the moment they're wandering down the aisle of the chapel, the wedding chapel, to make a lifetime commitment to each other. And I just find that bonkers. Honestly, it's bonkers. But they're claiming that they can have some success with this because they've developed an algorithm, an app that gets all that stuff, sorts it all out. I'm going to have to watch it now. Oh,
yeah.
I just want to see. I'm just wondering if they kind of base that on the logical levels, because it would make sense to, wouldn't it?
It would make absolute sense, and I think that is how. Well, I think it would stop a lot of heartache, a lot of time being wasted.
Sure.
You know, and I think if you just went, actually, where are you coming at from these perspectives?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we only have finite time on this earth. And for me, it's about how do we make the best use of that, building on the relationships that we can. And logical levels is such a wonderful way to do that, really.
Yeah, it is.
So we are coming on to 11:30.
Well, that was a lovely way of
wonderful, insightful hour it's been discussing logical levels.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting, Steve. So I think we should open up what happens in Steve and Jaff's pre-conversations, because I think I'm hoping people don't think this, but I suspect that some people go, they must really plan this really, really well. And what happens is me and Steve jump on a call quite typically on a Thursday. Sometimes it can be other days, but quite typically on a Thursday. And we just have a chat about what we've been up to over the week and how the week's gone for us, and good news, not so good news, and family and jobs and whatnot. And we have all those.
One of us will say, "Oh, I need to go now. What are we doing tomorrow?" What? We don't know. You do a story. I'll do it.
It's not as bad as that, Steve. Let's not make people think. And then, but genuinely, and then we'll go, great. Well, let's just share that through the lens of NLP. And I think that's what's really important. I believe any topic that we talked about, Steve, any kind of conversation in our personal life, you could always bring it back to NLP and using some of the tools and techniques that we've learned over the last however many years to support us to get greater insight into that. So a plea to you all, if there are any other conversations that you would like us to have, then please do let us know. We're not too sure whether we'll be on next week, but for now we're saying we won't be on next week or the week after, unfortunately. So the next time we will see you will be towards the end of October. Halloween time, Steve. Something for us to think about.
Oh, lovely.
Could be. We could dress up for the podcast. No, okay.
No.
Okay.
No.
That just gets me.
Stop.
Okay.
You dress up.
If anyone would like us to dress up, then please do let us know for Halloween.
No, don't.
And Steve, if people want to know more about the stuff that you're doing at the minute, where can they go? So is there a website? Is there
Yes. So www. I'm never sure how many.
There's 3.
www.torchbeamtad.co.uk is the website. We're also on Facebook. Yeah.
Fab. And if you want to connect with me or Steve on Facebook, you absolutely can do. We'd love to hear from you. But until later this month, we will say goodbye and thank you very much. Take care of yourselves, everyone.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye.